Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Bourne. I would love if you would help us leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts so other innovators like you can find us. Well, today I want to welcome Thailand to the list of the 53 plus countries listening from around the world. Welcome. Well, my guest today is Michael King. Michael is the founder and CEO of T.E.A.M.S, LLC. He is a sought-after executive and business leadership coach. He helps business leaders clarify and execute at high levels through his proprietary T.E.A.M.S methodology to develop measurable business growth and company-wide collaboration. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Natalie.
Well, I'd love to jump in and talk a little bit about your methodology, but I want to start by asking you, we know that leaders are under pressure, even more so, right, since 2020, and we were kind of forced to, some teams are working hybrid, they've never come back to work since 2020, others are partial coming back. Leaders are under a lot of pressure right now, and so I'd love to talk just about how we can prevent overwhelm and burnout in kind of this world we're living in today.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things is that 2022, it is a completely different game than what it was in 2019 or 2020. And what we're finding out a lot right now is that teams, they're having to figure out their strategies because brick and mortar locations, they now have multiple different versions of that. You have your virtual, your online, your digital business, you have your brick and mortar businesses, but you also have your remote culture. And these things don't always translate over to one another. So being able to come up with comprehensive and somewhat simple strategies to make sure that your values and your visions are translating over to each of these different segments, it's really important. And I think what you're experiencing right now when people are getting burnout, it's a lot of times is because they're trying the same things that have worked over and over and over again, but in different environments, and they're finding that they don't necessarily work. So when you try something hard and it doesn't work, well, you end up burning some people out.
That's really important. I think, it's funny you say that. Sometimes it doesn't require us to work harder. It requires us to work smarter. And I think that's part of what you're saying there. It's funny. I was talking to one of my coaches about just the immense pressure that I feel like I've been personally facing in this season. And then on top of that, I have like a high responsibility. And she was like, but you know what? Wherever you go, there you are. And you're like, you know what? It's your responsibility. It's hard to hear, but it's like your responsibility as the leader to change the environment.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm really glad that you said that. I one of the things that I try to tell our teams and our leaders all the time is the most powerful leader is the present one. So leading where you're at, blooming where you're planted, but being present in every single moment that you're in and showing up in those moments, that is absolutely essential for you to be able to impact the environments that you're in.
Well, I'd love to talk a little bit about your framework. Tell me a little bit about, how you came up with this framework, and then how do you use it when you're coaching business executives?
Yeah, well, the T.E.A.M.S methodology, I came up with this during my master's program, and I think good methodologies come from places of experiencing some success, but also experiencing some pain along the way. And with my background, I came from years of being an executive pastor, working with leaders in executive space, entrepreneur space, enterprise, but also in the church world, and being able to experience functional teams, functional culture, and also some dysfunctional things along the way really brought out some things that I wanted to chase down for my future. And one of the things that I noticed as I was working with different organizations was just this absolute necessary need for high levels of emotional intelligence within our teams. And so really my team's methodology is really built around this. So, as I'm working one-on-one with an executive or a team itself, the team's methodology really works out as it plays out. So we focus on targets, we look at engagement, we look at action plans, we look at momentum, and we look at overall team synergy. And so there's breakdowns of all those along the way. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about helping leaders get tangible results in a way that doesn't necessarily complicate things, but able to identify the things that really matter.
So I wonder, with your framework, do you find that as you're coaching people through this framework, do you find that there are some patterns? Like, are there common scenarios that every leader is kind of maybe not doing the best on? Do you find like you pick up some patterns along the way with this?
Yeah, we do. I think specifically, just kind of depending on one of the tools that I'm certified in, and we use just in our personality and our strength finding assessments is the Enneagram. Are you familiar with that?
Yes. Yep.
So the one of the things that we really find a lot in high level leaders is this drive. This like you're either an 8, 9, or 1 on the Enneagram, or a 3. You have a charismatic nature. You have this internal engine that keeps vision going and going and going. And the thing that we find that burns leaders out a lot is not knowing necessarily the capacity of their team and knowing when to dial that back a little bit, or scaling out their vision so their team can deploy the vision of that they actually have. Or the worst case scenario is that they start chasing things that aren't meant for them in the first place. They might see things from a different company or a different organization, and they might take that idea and they try to translate that over to the team that they have. And sometimes those ideas, they just aren't for that team or that leader. And it's really important that leader somehow has an aha moment to be able to get them on track and just to get them focused on the targets and to help them win where they're at and develop the systems and the strategies to support their comprehensive vision for where they're going.
Let's talk about capacity a little bit more, because I feel like there's a collective sigh when it comes to capacity. A lot of times leaders have a hard time articulating the capacity of their team. And then even more so, they have a hard time convincing the organization to dial back when they notice that their team is at or even overextended. So I would love to talk a little bit more about that piece, because I feel like that is a huge piece. When that's off, you burn people out at a faster rate than the normal kind of heavy workload.
You're preaching to the choir on this one here. I tell people this, is that stop wanting more, but let more happen. And I want you to hear me on that. Stop wanting more, but let more happen. And here's what I mean by that. We've actually developed an internal process called green lighting. And it really is just this idea of acknowledging first and foremost that a senior leader, it doesn't really matter what type of organization that you're in, and I've experienced this, but that internal pressure to be the internal visionary for your organization. So if you are a COO, CEO, CFO, if you're in that C-suite, somebody is wearing what we call like the CVO hat, right? The Chief Visionary Officer hat. So vision has to happen, and your values need to leak. They need to be able to come down through your organization. Mm-hmm. One of the best things for you to be able to do, though, is when you're dealing with capacity issues with your team, is just really embracing the idea of like, yes, I do have to come up with a vision, but I have to be able to scale it out in a way that gives my current team permission to not think about what's coming up next yet, but allow them to know what is coming up. But we're going to focus all of our energy on phase 1 per se. But once we hit a certain KPI or a certain goal, then they have permission to start thinking about phase 2. But really focusing in and making sure that you don't try to move your team on or taking on too many phases all at one time, that's where disenfranchisement happens. That's where people get demoralized. That's where failure starts to happen. And everybody wants to be a part of something that wins. And so being able to take that and just dial your vision back into steps and strategies, opposed to just taking it, trying to eat the elephant all at one time, that's a really big deal.
Well, what I hear you saying there too is there's pace and sequence to the work. And so oftentimes, the vision is set out, and then sometimes teams get pummeled with all these initiatives in addition to the vision. And I think that's where teams get weighted down, is that, when that work breaks out. And what I love that you're talking about too is planning. So there's a vision, and then behind that vision, there has to be planning, and there has to be stage gates to that. And as you start to walk through one stage gate to another, that's a sign that it's time to go to the next, versus just pummeling people with all these heavy initiatives and trying to figure out how to accomplish them all at once. And so there's something, in what you're saying that I think is providing the intelligent plan to actually begin to walk out some of the things that the organization wants to accomplish.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. You said that so well. I think when you are a leader, you have to remind yourself consistently that not everybody can see what you see, and they can't feel what you feel. And so leaders typically who have the biggest vision, they also have the highest levels of emotional response. And so they're emotionally bought into their vision. They want to see it happen. And sometimes they can accidentally push unnecessary emotional weight down onto their team. And that doesn't help anything, So everybody's always been a part of the team. I've been a part of the teams that have felt like, man, we have to deliver, we have to hurry up, or there's going to be some really big consequences.
Yep.
And 2022 is a different game now. Our human capital, it's at a higher value than it's ever been before. So people get to choose who they work for now. It's not necessarily that everybody, just has to work for you. So that's a pretty big deal.
That's a huge deal. And, you're leaning into now culture, because part of what must shift as part of what we've been through with COVID is culture. It has to shift. And it's like you said, because the war on talent is there, people can choose to work from anywhere. They can, live anywhere, move anywhere, and be anywhere. So they have to be bought into your culture. The culture has to support their goals. It used to be the other way around. We come in and support the goals of the organization. But now if I'm looking at a role, it has to support the goals that I have in my life. And so there's this massive shift, I think, that's happened in our society. And I think that some organizations are shifting with that. Some organizations are older, they're harder to move. And so they're not quite making that leap.
Yeah, the paradigm shifts are astronomical. So we're going from some old school thinking and some old school value systems that would say, this is what we're trying to build, and you have to be completely bought into my vision and my plan. Now we're heading into this 2022, 2023 and beyond workspace in which we're literally saying to our leaders, it's not necessarily what you're responsible for, but it's who you're responsible for. You as a leader, your number one objective is really to try to get your team member to their best fit. So the best versions of who they can be and their best fit within the organization or outside of the organization, in helping them accomplish their dreams. And I've taken that approach with my teams for quite a while. It's just understanding that, man, if somebody says yes, they want to be on my team, it's a gift. And, helping people get to their dream, get to their destination, everybody wins then. And I'm glad that we're actually experiencing this, because I think overall, 5 to 6 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to find our teams offering higher levels of quality work opposed to just fragmented dispositions. So I think that's really important to note.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think it's, when I think about culture, it obviously impacts growth as well. I'd love to talk about that for a moment, because as you're advising these leaders, part of your advice around team and culture really leans into growth, but we have to put culture first, and that can sometimes be hard, because we think growth first and we think success and goals first, but kind of flipping that and thinking that culture will drive the growth is it's like what you said earlier, it's a paradigm shift.
It really is. And this comes down to either short-term or long-term gains, right? So there's 4 specific, leadership type of temperaments. We have the servant leader, we have the charismatic leader, we have the transformational leader, and we have the transactional leader. A lot of the times in some of our organizations, the senior leaders tend to typically kind of almost protect themselves into some sort of space of being a transactional leader. Transactional leaders are the ones that say, okay, this is what you provide for me, and here's what I'm going to pay you for your services and what you bring to the table. And that's the end of your value. Wow. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes. I've at one time been that leader, and I've also worked for those leaders.
I have been that in the exact same position. And I think here's the thing is that transactional leaders, they reproduce transactional leaders.
That's right.
And so if that's the model that you were kind of like, that's the thing that you've always known, you might have wanted something different within your heart, and you wanted to be connected differently, but that's the thing that's just kind of the model of success that you were kind of brought up under, right?
Right.
But what we're finding is that transformational leaders is that there has to be this healthy balance. The charismatic leader is the person that walks into the room and everybody knows that they're there, and people just sense their presence. And so high level leaders have to have a certain level of charisma in order to be effective.
Yep.
And, but when it comes to servant leadership, as well as serving your team and transformational leadership, it's this really understanding this balance. We can't throw transactional leadership out the window and just saying, okay, that's a horrible idea. No, because we do have KPIs and we have things that we have to, deliver upon. But transformational leaders, they typically have teams that stay with them longer, and teams that stay with their teams longer, they have a longer term success, which means that their culture is going to sustain longer. If you are just a transactional leader and you have turnover after turnover after turnover, well, you're never really going to be able to build a culture because your culture is only what it exists within that single moment. Now, you might have an aspirational culture. You might have something that you want to build, but is it real? Or is it just something that you've written about?
Wow. I would love for you to tell me more about those other types of leaders. So you kind of talked about the transactional leader. I would love to, and we kind of all know who the charismatic leader is, right? We probably have like 5 people in our head when you said that. But what about those other 2? Can we talk about those a little bit?
Yeah. So you have your transactional leader, and then you have your charismatic leader. And then you have your transformational leader. And a transformational leader really kind of, they're the type of person that says, hey, I see where you're at and I see your potential. And my job is to be able to help you get to your next destination, your next goal. My job is to be able to help bring out the best in you. Transformational leaders, they tend to exist in relationships in which somebody's life is actually affected by somebody else's proximity. I have a tendency to where I want to actually be involved in transformational relationships. That's the type of leader that I am. And I really try to work with leaders to help raise their EQ within the workspace to be able to bring transformational leaders onto the team. Now, the other type is servant-based leadership. And this one gets a little confusing because a lot of times church leadership, they use the servant-based team leadership
All the
model
time.
all
Yes.
the time. And I don't know necessarily if it's 100% healthy. I would say, like, if we were to say that Jesus was a servant leader, yes, but he walked in a lot of authority too, if you look back at just biblical teaching. So servant leadership does not mean that you're giving your team permission to walk on you. And I want to be clear about that. Servant leadership literally means, I know the needs of my team. I'm going to make sure that they have the needs and the processes, the systems, and the strategies and the resources for them to perform well. And I'm going to give them fair and accurate feedback when necessary. It doesn't mean that your team is just going to have their way with you per se.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that because I think that we have seen servant leadership presented that way, that it's something where you kind of just have to take whatever your team dishes out. You kind of have to take it. And I love the way that you're positioning servant leadership because it is about serving the team, but it's you're still leading the team. You're still providing feedback to the team. You're still growing the team and helping the team get better, which is the whole point of why that word leader is there, because you're taking everyone on a journey.
So important, because if you look at that term servant leader, I always like to tell people, you're in the middle of a teeter-totter as a leader, to where you have this balance pendulum going to where on one side you're serving the leaders and the teams, and the other side you're serving the vision. You have to figure out how to make it balance.
That's so powerful. I would love to know, just if someone is looking to work with you, what does your process look like for getting started? Like, do you assess them? Do you assess the team? I know you talked about using Enneagram. I'd love to know a little bit more about how they would kind of get into the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's just a one-on-one coaching relationship, which typically it starts off with me working with a senior leader, but our goal is to be able to do a full team engagement platform. So we have a couple different things that we use, but the Enneagram assessment is one of the first things that's part of our application process. And then once we onboard people into our coaching relationships, we actually have our T.E.A.M.S.COACH app. And within there, the whole team's methodology is broken down into daily pushes. People can document their progress. Leaders get reports on the things that they need to know to where they can actually measure their progress, even in engagement internally. Like I said to you before, we really build our platform around the idea of elevating emotional intelligence within team space, because we find that that's probably one of the most valuable assets to a team right now, is higher levels of emotional engagement with a team. So we're actually able to measure that and be able to help you give some indicators for how your culture is doing when it comes to those types of things.
Wow. What would you say has been the biggest aha moment of someone going through your team's process, your methodology? Like, what would you say has been the biggest standout, or maybe just a recent story that you have?
Yeah, one of the stories is working with a leader, and we came down to some key words for his 2022 goals. And some of these key words were empowerment, making sure that you bring a clear definition of empowerment to your team, because whether you like it or not, 2022 offers us some significantly different definitions of what empowerment could be like within your workspace. So bringing that engagement, does your team actually know that they can see themselves in your story? So as a senior leader, does your team actually know who you are? And so we were kind of going through these words with him, and he came back to me and he just said, I want you to hold me accountable to this, and I want us to find out ways that I can empower my team better, because in my head, I thought that I was empowering my team in a certain way, only to find out later that they felt incredibly micromanaged.
Wow.
And so we went through and we did some assessments. We found out some really key definitions that would help move him along in a way to bring a greater level of understanding. So in this one particular situation, having your team and your senior leader looking from the exact same definition book, that was really important in this specific team. And this was a large company. So this wasn't something that was like small. This was a pretty big deal.
Wow, that's powerful. And, you're leaning into something around just 360 feedback as well. Oftentimes as leaders, it's kind of like that Johari window that we talk about where, it's what you know and other people know about you. And then there's what you know about you, but other people don't know. And all those different windows. And part of coaching, what it does is it expands the window so that other people will know you better, but you'll also know yourself better, which is so powerful.
Absolutely, 100%. And what we're finding out too is that we've kind of in that same transactional pattern, we've been told to give feedback a lot to our teams, and to make sure that, no gap is missed or et cetera. But now it's actually more valuable to leaders. Out of 7,000 different team members that we've surveyed over the last few years, we've actually found out that the most valuable feedback that we get is from the team member to the team leader, not the other way around. So for you as a senior leader, for you to know and actually have factual data how your team feels about who you are, that's the most valuable piece of information that you can have.
I agree. It's so powerful. Well, where can people find you? Where can they follow you?
Yeah, you can follow me on all social channels. So on Facebook, Michael King at Teams.COACH as well, and also on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. So make sure to find me there. You can also find me through my website at Teams.COACH. Now, my cell phone number is on my website, and I'm that executive coach to where I like to be accessible. And so I always give out my cell phone number just in case somebody wants to text me a question. And I promise you will not get put into a funnel. I'll go ahead and answer that question for you, but that's a pretty big deal. So is that okay if I give that out now?
Of course.
So my cell phone number is area code 763-245-4984.
That is awesome. There's a author that I love, Bob Goff, and he puts his cell phone number in the back. And surprisingly, yes, did you get it from him? Well, I have a friend that's called him. She's like, I've talked to him like 3 times. I'm like, you're stalking this man? So I just love that you do that. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Hey, thank you so much.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.